Why do you think it's obvious when a man wants you? The late night texts, the easy compliments, the clear signs everyone talks about. But here's what nobody tells you. When you become his fantasy, when you're the woman who takes over his thoughts in ways he can't control, he doesn't show it the way you'd expect. In fact, the deeper you get into his head, the quieter he becomes about it. What if I told you that his silence might actually mean you matter more, not less? That the fewer words he says might prove you've become something way more powerful in his mind than just another person he likes. In today's video, we're breaking down the 6 clear signs that show you're living in his head as his ultimate fantasy, even when he never admits it out loud. These aren't the basic things everyone talks about. We're not looking at whether he texts you back fast or likes your photos. We're going deeper into the psychological patterns, the behavior changes, and the things he does without thinking that expose when you've gone from interest to obsession, from casual attraction to something he thinks about in private moments he'd never say out loud. Because here's the reality. When a man sees you as his fantasy, he doesn't broadcast it. He protects it. He guards it like a secret he's scared someone might find out, including you. By the end of this video, you'll understand the hidden signals of male obsession, how to spot when you've become more than just attractive to him, and what these secret behaviors actually mean. So stay with me, pay close attention, and let's uncover the truth his words won't say, but his actions can't hide. Here's what most people get wrong about male psychology. When it comes to fantasy, to the woman who lives in that special mental space, men don't act the way you'd think. We're told that desire means pursuit, that attraction means bold moves and clear woe. Yes, but when you become someone's fantasy, something different happens, something quieter, something more intense. The psychology behind this is fascinating. Men are taught from a young age to keep their emotions separate, to divide what they feel from what they show. But when someone crosses from attraction into fantasy territory, that separation gets even stronger. Why? Because fantasy feels dangerous. It feels exposing. Admitting you're his fantasy means admitting you have power over him that he can't control. Think about what fantasy actually means. It's not just finding someone attractive. It's thinking about scenarios he has no right to imagine. It's thinking about you in situations that go beyond right now. It's building a version of connection in his mind that exists separately from what's real. And that level of mental and emotional investment, it scares most men. When you're his fantasy, he's already thought about conversations you haven't had, moments you haven't shared, and futures he hasn't earned. His mind has taken you places his courage hasn't followed. And that gap between what he imagines and what he's brave enough to go after creates a specific kind of behavior. You might notice he seems almost too controlled around you. His responses feel careful. His eye contact is measured. His words are picked out deliberately. This isn't disinterest. It's the opposite. It's a man who's terrified that if he lets his guard down for even a second, everything he's been thinking about you will come flooding out. And he's not ready for that kind of exposure. Science backs this up completely. When we're deeply attracted to someone, when they've entered fantasy territory, the part of our brain responsible for decisions and self-control goes into overdrive trying to manage our impulses. He's literally fighting a mental battle between what he wants to say and what he lets himself show. Understanding this psychology changes everything, because once you realize that his holding back actually mean deeper feelings rather than no interest, you start seeing his behavior through a completely different lens. His silence isn't rejection. His careful distance isn't coldness. They're ways of protecting feelings that have grown way beyond what he's ready to handle. And as we move into the specific signs, you'll see exactly how this internal war shows up in ways he can't completely hide, no matter how hard he tries. When you've become someone's fantasy, one of the strongest signs shows up in how self-conscious he gets around you, but only in specific telling ways. This isn't general nervousness. This is targeted worry about how you see him. And here's what makes this sign so clear. He doesn't care this much about anyone else's opinion. You'll notice it in how he watches himself when you're around. Maybe his posture shifts the moment you walk into a room, straightening without thinking. Maybe he fixes his appearance more, running his hand through his hair, checking his shirt, adjusting details that were perfectly fine seconds before you showed up. These aren't vanity moves. They're automatic responses to wanting to match the version of himself he thinks you deserve. His voice changes too, and this is where the fantasy part becomes obvious. When someone is casually interested, their voice stays pretty much the same. But when you're their fantasy, when they've built you up in their mind as this elevated person, their tone shifts. It might get deeper, trying to sound more confident than he feels, or it might get softer in ways it doesn't with others, almost careful when he talks to you directly. Listen carefully next time he says your name. There's often a tiny pause before it, like he's enjoying the chance to say it out loud. The self-consciousness goes to his words too. He second guesses himself more with you. You might catch him starting sentences and then stopping, rewording, trying to land on exactly the right thing to say. While he talks freely and easily with everyone else, with you there's hesitation, there's calculation. Because in his mind, everything he says to you matters more. What's happening here on a biological level is pretty remarkable. When we're around someone who's become our fantasy, the emotional center of our brain kicks into high alert. It releases stress hormones, not because we're in danger, but because the stakes feel huge. His nervous system genuinely believes that how you see him carries weight beyond a normal interaction. Here's where it gets even more interesting. This self-consciousness often goes against his normal personality in clear ways. A man who's usually relaxed, casual, maybe even a little careless about how he presents himself suddenly becomes precise around you. Or the opposite. A man who's normally very put together might become slightly messy in your presence because his usual control gets disrupted by the emotional intensity you trigger. Either way, the contrast is the key. Pay attention to how he reacts when you compliment him or when you criticize him, even gently, if you're his fant. AC, both responses get amplified. A compliment from you lands different. His face might flush slightly. He might downplay it, but you'll see him hold on to it, maybe even bring it up later. And criticism, even playful, stings in a way that's visible for just a flash before he recovers. Because when you're someone's fantasy, you're not just another person with an opinion. You're the person whose opinion shapes how he sees himself. His nervousness around you is actually proof of how much space you take up in his thoughts. And as we move forward, you'll see that this mental space shows up in even more specific ways, especially in how he remembers every single detail about you, even the ones you'd swear you never shared. One of the most undeniable signs you're his fantasy shows up in the details, specifically in how he remembers things about you that you barely remember telling him. This goes beyond good memory. This is selective memory driven by obsession. When someone becomes your fantasy, your brain doesn't just hear their words. It saves them. It creates files. And he's doing this automatically, without trying, because everything about you has become important. You'll test this by accident. Months after a casual conversation, he'll bring up something specific you said in passing, a story about your childhood that you mentioned once, a preference you shared that seemed small at the time, an opinion you gave about something completely random. And when he brings it up, there's this moment where you think, how does he remember that? The answer is simple. When you're someone's fantasy, their brain marks everything connected to you as important information. It's not that he's trying to memorize details about you, it's that his mind refuses to let them go. Brain science explains this beautifully. When we're emotionally invested in someone, especially when they take up fantasy space, the memory center of our brain works overtime whenever they're involved. Feel-good chemicals flood the system during interactions with them. And those chemicals don't just make us feel good, they strengthen memory formation. Every word you say to him is basically being recorded in high definition while conversations with others get stored in standard quality. What makes this even more revealing is how he uses these details. He doesn't just remember them, he brings them back. Maybe you mentioned loving a specific type of weather, and months later when that weather comes, he messages you about it. Maybe you talked about a problem you were dealing with, and without you bringing it up again, he asks how it turned out. These callbacks aren't accidents. They're proof that you exist in his thoughts far beyond the moments you're physically there. Most people listen at surface level. They catch the main points but let the details slip away. But when you're someone's fantasy, he's not just listening to respond. He's listening to understand, to collect, to build a more complete picture of who you are. Every conversation with you adds another piece to the image he's putting together in his mind. You might also notice he remembers things you don't remember telling him at all. This is really telling. Sometimes when someone takes up fantasy space, we pay such close attention that we pick up information they never directly said. He might know your coffee order from watching you once. He might understand your mood patterns from watching your energy. He might recognize your preferences in music, in food, in humor, not because you sat down and explained them, but because he's been studying you without even knowing it. And here's what separates this from general attention. He doesn't do this with everyone. If you notice, he's pretty forgetful with others, average in his memory of their stories and preferences. But with you, it's different. That's the line. That's how you know this isn't just someone who has good memory. This is someone whose brain has decided you're worth remembering in complete detail. When a man can recall tiny pieces of conversations from months ago, when he knows your preferences better than people who've known you longer, when he tracks the threads of your life with accuracy that surprises even you, you're not just in his life, you're living in his head. But remembering details is only one layer. The next sign shows something even more raw, something he can't practice or control, the way his entire physical presence changes when you're near. Body language might be the most honest form of communication that exists, especially when someone becomes a fantasy. Because here's the thing about fantasies, they live in the mind, but they show up in the body. And when you're his fantasy, his physical responses to you being there become their own language, one he's often not even aware he's speaking. You'll see it in the magnetic pull that happens when you're in the same space. A man who's casually interested might look your way sometimes, but a man for whom you're a fantasy experiences something different. There's a gravitational effect. His body turns toward you even when he's not choosing it. His shoulders angle in your direction. His feet point toward you. When you move, his posture shifts to keep that invisible connection. Watch his hands when you're talking. Men who see someone as their fantasy often don't know what to do with their hands around that person. They'll move more than usual, not out of boredom, but out of excess nervous energy. They might touch their face more, run fingers along their jaw, press palms together. These are self-calming movements, ways his body tries to manage the intensity of having you close. Eye contact becomes complicated in fascinating ways. With casual attraction, eye contact is usually straightforward, comfortable, even flirty. But when you're someone's fantasy, eye contact turns into this push-pull thing. Sometimes he holds your gaze longer than socially normal, like he's trying to say something words can't capture. But other times, he'll break eye contact suddenly, almost like looking at you too long feels dangerous, too revealing. That back and forth between intense eye contact and sudden looking away, that's the fantasy pattern. Notice how close he gets to you compared to others. Fantasy level attraction creates this interesting tension with personal space. Sometimes he'll lean in closer than necessary when talking, pulled by that gravitational thing we mentioned. But other times, he might keep more distance than normal, creating physical space as a way to manage the emotional intensity. Both patterns mean something. If he's inconsistent with his closeness, moving in, then pulling back, that push-pull is classic fantasy behavior. Watch what happens when someone else touches you, even casually. If you're his fantasy, his body will react before his mind can stop it. His jaw might tighten slightly. His posture might get stiff. He might shift his position without thinking, trying to insert himself into the space or get your attention back. These are tiny expressions of ownership, small reveals of the fact that in his mind, you already belong to him in ways reality hasn't caught up to yet. There's something especially telling about how his energy changes when you enter a room. Before you arrive, he might be relaxed, laughing, casual with others, but the moment you show up, there's a shift, not necessarily toward nervousness, but toward alertness. His entire system comes online in a different way. He becomes more animated or more controlled, depending on his personality. But either way, there's a visible change in his energy output. Body language doesn't lie about fantasy because body language can't lie. It's the unedited version of what's happening beneath his careful words and controlled face. And if you start watching for these physical tells, you'll see them everywhere, especially in the next sign, which shows how desperately he creates reasons to exist in your world. When you're someone's fantasy, being near you becomes his obsession, but he'll disguise it as coincidence. He won't say, I want to be near you, so I'm creating chances to make that happen. Instead, he'll build situations that seem accidental, natural, unplanned. But make no mistake, when a man sees you as his fantasy, nothing about his closeness to you is accidental. You'll start noticing patterns. He shows up in places you go to with explanations that sound reasonable but happen too consistently to be random. Maybe he suddenly needs coffee from the same cafe you visit. Maybe he's taking walks on the same route you mentioned once. Maybe he's going to events or joining spaces where he knows you'll be armed with perfectly logical reasons that have nothing to do with you, except they have everything to do with you. The smart part of this behavior is in its deniability. If questioned, he has built-in explanations, but pattern recognition tells the real story. Once is coincidence, twice is chance, 3 or more times is strategy. When you're his fantasy, his mind is constantly calculating opportunities to be in your orbit without looking intentional about it. Watch how he volunteers for things that connect him to your world. If you mention needing help with something, even something small, he's immediately available. Not in an over-eager way, but with this casual willingness that seems generous but is actually strategic. He's creating touch points. He's making legitimate reasons to interact, to be useful, to exist in your space without admitting he just wants to be near you. Conversations stretch beyond their natural ending when you're involved. With others, he's efficient, exchanges information and moves on. But with you, there's always one more question, one more thought, one more reason the conversation isn't quite done. He's stretching time. He's expanding moments. Because if you're his fantasy, every interaction with you is valuable, and he's not letting it end a second sooner than it has to. This is where his investment becomes obvious. Time is the most honest thing we have. We spend time on what matters. And if he's consistently finding ways to spend time near you, in your presence, in your world, even in small doses, even in manufactured scenarios, that's not friendly interest. That's fantasy level priority. Here's what's really revealing. He remembers logistics about you that he shouldn't. He knows your schedule better than people who are actually in your life daily. He knows when you're busy, when you're free, where you usually are on certain days. This isn't stalking. This is attentive absorption. When someone is your fantasy, you collect information about them, not because you're trying to, but because your brain focuses on anything that helps you maximize time with them. He finds ways to stay connected to your world, even when you're not there. Maybe he engages with things you care about, your interests, your causes. Maybe he brings up topics you mentioned because he went and learned more about them on his own time. This is getting into your world through genuine interest. He's building bridges into your life so that even when you're apart, he's still connected to spaces and ideas that matter to you. If you start tracking his closeness patterns and realize they're not random, if you notice he's engineered more interactions than chance would allow, you're seeing proof. The man who sees you as his fantasy doesn't wait passively hoping you'll cross his path. He quietly, subtly, strategically creates the circumstances where crossing paths becomes inevitable. But as calculated as his closeness might be, there's one thing he absolutely cannot control. And that's what happens inside him when someone else enters your world. That's where jealousy becomes the loudest confession he'll never speak out loud. Jealousy is one of the most primitive, uncontrollable emotions humans experience. And when you're someone's fantasy, when he's built an entire internal relationship with you that exists only in his mind, jealousy doesn't just appear, it explodes. But here's the complexity. He can't express it. He has no claim to you, no official right to care who else gets your attention. So what does he do? He tries to bury it. He tries to seem unbothered. But jealousy, especially at fantasy level, leaks out in ways he can't fully hide. You'll catch it in his tiny reactions first. Someone else makes you laugh, really laugh, and for just a fraction of a second, his expression changes. His smile tightens, his eyes shift. It happens so fast you might think you imagined it, but you didn't. That flash of something, discomfort, irritation, pain, that's jealousy breaking through before he can rebuild his mask. When another man touches you, even innocently, watch what happens to his body. His jaw might clench, his shoulders might pull back, his hands might form fists for just a moment before he forces them to relax. These are automatic physical responses to perceived threat. And the threat isn't physical, it's emotional. It's the threat of someone else accessing what he's already claimed in his fantasy. His tone changes too when other men are mentioned. You might be telling a story that involves another guy, completely innocent context, and suddenly his responses become shorter, clipped, less engaged. Or the opposite happens. He becomes overly interested, asking questions that sound casual but are actually information gathering. Who is this person? How close are you? What does he mean to you? He's mapping competition even though he'd never call it that. Sometimes jealousy shows up as pulling back. This is the man who suddenly goes quiet when another guy enters the conversation or the space. He doesn't compete openly. Instead, he retreats, watching from a distance. But inside, he's noting everything, every laugh you give that person, every moment of attention they get. He's comparing himself, measuring himself, wondering if he measures up to the version of himself he's presented in his fantasy where he's already won you. Other times, jealousy shows up as overcompensation. He becomes louder, funnier, more talkative when competition appears. He's showing off without realizing it. He's trying to get your attention back, to remind you he exists, to outshine whoever has temporarily taken the spotlight. It's not conscious strategy, it's instinct. Here's what makes this particular sign so definitive. The intensity of his jealousy is directly connected to how much space you take up in his fantasy. Casual attraction produces mild jealousy, easy to hide. But fantasy level investment produces jealousy that's visceral, that's harder to mask, that colors his entire mood when triggered. There's also the aftermath. Pay attention to how he acts after a jealousy trigger. Maybe later, once the other person is gone, he makes subtle comments. Nothing direct, but little remarks that show he was affected. Or maybe he becomes more attentive, more present, as if trying to reclaim ground he feels he lost. Jealousy has a hangover effect. It doesn't just disappear when the trigger leaves. The psychology here is fascinating. When someone becomes our fantasy, we experience something called psychological ownership. We feel a sense of possession over them, even though logically we know we have no actual claim. That ownership is what makes jealousy so intense. In his mind, in his fantasy, you're already his. So when reality introduces competition, when someone else gets access to you, even friendly access, it creates mental conflict. What makes this sign especially reliable is that jealousy is nearly impossible to fake and equally impossible to fully hide. He can pretend he doesn't care. He can build a face that looks unbothered. But if you watch closely, if you catch him in those unguarded microseconds, you'll see the truth break through. His jealousy is proof that you've become more than someone he's attracted to. You've become someone he's emotionally invested in protecting, even from threats that aren't real threats. And when a man reaches that level of investment, there's usually one more behavior that follows. And that's when his walls start coming down in ways they don't for anyone else. And here's what I want you to remember. If you see these signs,